Thanks everybody for joining us. My name is Ed Orlett. I work for the National Association of Electrical Distributors, which means I work for you. And on behalf of NAED's Futures Group, we welcome you to our office hours live chat on electric vehicle infrastructure, its potential and potential roadblocks. So as I mentioned, this is brought to you by the NAED Futures Group. And the Futures Group is something that the NAED Board of Directors put together 18 months ago or so to look at the future of the industry. We feel like in this industry, we do a good job of looking at best practices. What can we do right now to try and make our businesses better? But we thought there was an opportunity to maybe have some industry leaders take a look farther down the road. And that's what we're here to talk about. I guess no pun intended with the road comment. But just say a couple things before we get started. We are recording this session for those who couldn't make it. We did have close to 100 people register today, so we're going to record this for their benefit. And if you registered, you'll get it. So the Futures Group is made up of quite an august list of industry leaders, a few of whom are with us today. And there you can see who those folks are. We thank them for their commitment. So every month, the Futures Group releases a series of media pieces on a given topic. We'll do a podcast, we'll do a newsletter article, and then we'll also do these office hours live discussions, all based on the same topic. This month, we're talking about electric vehicle charging infrastructure. And we'd encourage you to subscribe to our email list at nad.org/futures, or just email me and say, hey, sign me up. I think most of you have my email address. But this is way you can keep in touch with what we do on a monthly basis. The topic today is certainly one that's obviously got a lot of people's interest, and we got some stellar folks here to talk to you about it, and I'll introduce them in just a second. But here's how we're going to do this today. I would encourage you to use your camera if you're willing. We are trying to make these office hours discussions. We're trying to not just do another webinar. So we want to hear from you. We do want you to participate in dialogue between us, our speakers, and one another. So there's a variety of ways you can do that. You can put questions in the chat box. That's just fine. You can also raise your hand on your Zoom control button at the bottom and ask a question that way. If you got your camera on and your microphone, we can see your pretty face and hear your mellifluous voice, and then maybe even have a little back and forth. That's ideally what we'll do on this thing. Of course, if you're shy and you just want to listen in, that's all good too. So those are the ground rules. I'm going to introduce our guests here in a minute, but here's kind of the way we're going to structure this thing. We're going to start off talking about where we're at now, and then go into the market opportunities and the growth potential that we're seeing in this market space. Then we've also going to talk about the public funding, which is significant, and how that money is going to flow. We'll talk a little bit about maybe the hurdles and the roadblocks to what looks like a pretty impressive market opportunity for us. And then if we have time, we might have a few crazy thoughts about the future, because this is, after all, the Futures Group. So that's our game plan. Well, we got you for an hour, but we won't go over, just in respect to everyone's schedules. So I'm going to introduce our guests real quick. Cassie Powers is with us. And Cassie, I'm going to ask you to unmute in a second and tell us a little bit about yourself. Cassie is Senior Managing Director at NASEO. And a lot of you are saying, what is NASEO? NASEO is the National Association of State Energy Officials. And there is an association for everything, folks. But the state governments have energy offices, transportation offices, just like the federal government. And NASEO is one of the leading entities in Washington with information on energy and electricity in this country. And we're lucky to have Cassie with us. Cassie, maybe just say a couple words about yourself or your background.
Thanks, Ed. Hi, everyone. This is Cassie. As Ed said, I'm delighted to be here. I am with NASIO. There was a good overview of what it is and what we do, but there are energy offices in every state. And so you can go ahead and Google yours or visit our website, nasio.org, and you'll be able to find your correct energy office in your state. And my background is in actually EV policy. We at NASIO help to support our members across a variety of different energy issue areas, from electrification to grid and energy planning, clean energy financing, energy emergencies and security, transportation, electrification. It really spans the full gamut. But I've been doing EV policy work here in Washington for about a decade now, and really enjoy supporting the states as they're designing their EV programs. Right now, there's obviously a great opportunity with some of the funding through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes.
Great, Cassie, appreciate that. And I think one of the things it's really beneficial to us to have Cassie here today is because a lot of times we talk about all this money that the federal government is appropriating to support the development of EV infrastructure. And it's not just as simple as the federal government throwing a bunch of money out into the wilderness, although it may seem that way periodically. There's actually some nuance to it. And so Cassie's a great person to have her with us. We appreciate her, of course. Matthew Young is Business Development Leader for Transportation Electrification at ABB. And as I just learned the other day from talking to him, my neighbor in North Carolina. So Matthew, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey, thanks, Ed, and hello, everybody. Happy to be here today. I've been with ABB almost 10 years. ABB is a leader in the space of electric vehicles, so I get to talk about something that's really fun. I'm a car guy. I love EVs. Love what's going on in the world, and I see a huge opportunity for everybody on this call in the coming decades. So really excited to be here and chat about what's going on.
Thanks, Matthew. And also, I think that's what's interesting about this, right? It seems like the opportunity is here, but we are at the very beginning of this. So I think this still qualifies as a future discussion because the opportunity is certainly long-term. Last, but by no means least, my partner in crime, my co-host in this excursion into the unknown, Mr. Mark Dancer, who is the CEO of the Network for Business Innovation. A lot of you have known Mark over the years from his work with NAW on Facing the Forces of Change. Mark is with us. Mark, say hi. Tell us about yourself.
Hey, Ed, I'm very happy to be here. I think this is a conversation for the long term. We're starting to talk about EVs and electrification today, but this is a topic we're going to come back to many, many times in the months ahead. So I'm looking forward to listening and learning and see what our great guests and what our members have to say. It's going to be fun.
Yes, sir. Okay, first we're going to do a couple polls. These polls are always sort of flying without a net on Zoom. Hopefully they'll work okay. But I like doing them because I think it gives us all a view of where the audience is in our journey into this subject. So Gail has launched the first poll. If you would, please respond. How much do you know about electric vehicle charging infrastructure? Take one choice. About half of you have responded. It's neck and neck between a little bit and enough to be dangerous. Enough to be dangerous is making a move. So, okay, we got about 80%. All who have spoken have spoken. And as my experience with the National Association of Electrical Distributors over the last 21 years is when I ask members a question, there is never one answer that rises above all the others. There's always, so it's not clear, but we can see that everybody's kind of in the middle of that bell curve. Gail, share those results. So there you see. And then we got one more question we want to ask everybody. How heavily invested in EV charging infrastructure is your company? You're in the information gathering phase, which is why you're here. You've stocked and sold some material, planning a significant investment, or we have a dedicated supply effort to supply. Hey, Gail, you didn't use my snarky answer on that one full. That's okay. Looks like we've got about 2/3 of you have responded to this one. So let's share that one. Third and third. Actually, really cool to see that 9 of our 32 respondents have really gotten into this business. So, hey, those of you who have, you can go ahead and get rid of that poll, Gail. Those of you who have, one of the reasons we ask everybody to get on their camera and participate in this is because this is a networking opportunity for those of you who have experience in this market, good and bad, to share your experiences and learn from one another. So please keep that in mind as we go. So I am going to first, we're going to relinquish control of my screen to Matthew Young from ABB, who's got some great insights he's going to share with us to kind of kick this thing off.
All right. Can you see and hear? Hopefully so. All right. Well, everybody, you know, there's this thing happening called the electrification of vehicles. It's a trend. It's really moving forward. In fact, it is accelerating. And today, Ed asked me to just set the table for our discussion with kind of what we're seeing in the market, what's going on, some data. So I'll go through some slides. I promise to go fast because no one likes boring slides. This whole thing, this market, this trend is accelerating. There's 3 main reasons: climate policy. We know some of the IIJA, the IRA. We've got some state policies. We've got some utility things going on. It's really driving acceleration. Battery costs are dropping like a rock. They're almost to the level where a electric vehicle is the same price as a regular car. We expect to hit that about 2025. And then private investment is happening everywhere. Here's one example: automakers, $1.2 trillion. That's with a T, of promised investment in the space. That is bananas. About a year ago, that number said 500 billion. So in 11 months, it's more than doubled. So lots of money flowing into the space. That's just the automakers, doesn't even include all the folks gearing up to do the infrastructure. If you look over the next several decades, as many firms do, you can see a lot of really interesting things starting to form and a lot of predictions being made. By 2030, there's going to be a lot more electric vehicles sold in the United States and in North America. About 30% of passenger cars by 2030 are expected to be electric, and then 3 years later, 50% of cars sold. Not cars on road, but cars sold. If you look in the middle here, you can see transit buses are the fastest electrifying segment of vehicles, but there are significant percentages of new car sales, new vehicle sales over the next couple of decades. We're on a very rapidly increasing curve. In fact, the chart you see here is about a year old, and we've actually gone faster than this chart in the last year. So we keep accelerating in the space as far as car sales and infrastructure installed. So we're on to something. What's that mean? That means that your EV charging investment is going to be needed. I think today we're actually above 50% CAGR this year, but the average over the about 7-year period is about 40. Then it slows down to a measly 30% growth per year before hitting a 20% growth per year and leading up to 2040. So lots and lots of growth. I think one of the things I always say on this is we haven't seen this kind of growth in an industrial segment since maybe the steam engine, maybe oil and gas in the 1950s. This is a tremendous opportunity for us in the United States. It's $100 billion of electrical hardware, not including services, just hardware, over the next 8 years. That number is conservative. That number is growing because of the acceleration we've seen recently for all the reasons I just mentioned. So, but let's just go with $100 billion. If you break that out in the United States, people think about electric vehicle charging. They think about an electric vehicle and a charger most of the time, but there's a bigger picture. There's the grid, there's the gear, there's the charger itself, and then the vehicle. And all in, if you think about the hardware that we're talking about, again, a conservative number, there's a lot of grid upgrades. There's 60 billion there. There's 17 billion in customer side gear and 24 billion in chargers. If you take the grid out of the picture, that's $40 billion over the next 8 years. This is a conservative number. What's happened since that number was calculated is a massive acceleration, probably looking more like 125 billion by the end of the decade. We're just seeing more and more, more and more interest. So one thing to think about as distributors and as in the electrical industry, the grid upgrades, you may ignore that, but don't, because utilities are thinking about this in many ways, and some of those are, of course, power generation, but also renewable integration, which is electrical. You've got distribution upgrades, and you've got battery energy storage at grid scale, which a lot of distributors are going to be involved in a lot of those projects. So many billions at play here, and that's just this decade. The following decade is even larger. In fact, globally, here we go again, $1 trillion, but that's with a T, of electrical infrastructure for e-mobility, for EV charging globally by 2040. So this is a massive segment. It's got a long future. It's got a long way to run.
Hey, Matthew, let me interrupt you for a second. Go back for a second, because I think I hate big numbers because they're hard for me to understand. And I do part of my job with NAD is doing government affairs, public policy, and you get lost in the numbers sometimes. But I know we're in a period of significant price inflation for a lot of our material. So, but by a lot of estimates, the value of our channel right now is somewhere between 100, 150 billion dollars a year. So even if that 100 billion is not annual, right? And even if a lot of that is utility, which is kind of its own animal, there's still opportunity there, and it is extremely significant opportunity, and that's new business, right? So it's
Right.
The scale of it really did surprise me when you and I talked about this the other day.
The best news about all of this is that this is all new money, and it's in our wheelhouse. Like, this is not rocket science, but it is all new money. Like, this isn't cannibalizing anybody else's current electrical projects. It's taking away from pipes and storage containers and pumps. Like, it is creating a brand new energy matrix. So it's a really huge project. It's a really huge industry. It's going to be a lot of fun. Let me keep moving forward here. We'll get done with these slides. So if you don't know anything about charging, or if you do, here is just a general primer. You've got different levels of charging. You've got AC, which people refer to sometimes as slow, or charging in hours, and then you've got DC charging, which is charging in minutes. So if you've probably heard level 1, level 2, or level 3. Level 1 and level 2 are AC. They're hours. Level 3 is DC. It's generally minutes, and it all depends on the type of vehicle, how much power is coming out of the charger. And some of these DC chargers can go from 24 kilowatts up to 1,000 kilowatts. It's crazy how much power you can shove through a charger. And it all depends on how long a car sits still. Maybe it's going to be a truck that's parked overnight in a fleet. Well, you can charge that thing slow, it's fine. Or maybe we need to charge it very quickly because we're on a road trip, right? So there's minutes options and there's hours options. One thing that we should know, the level 1 is not real common actually in the United States. It would be plugged in straight to a regular outlet. Not going to be very fast, not going to help most drivers. Level 2 is extremely common in the United States. You're going to see this in people's garages. You're going to see it at overnight truck depots, hotels, things like that. These are destination sites. You either have a wall box that you can see here, or you would have an outlet from an oven, 240 volt. And then everything else is DC. This is the major leagues. This is where there's a lot of energy and a lot of electrical to be had. There's just a couple examples. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these, but like here's an overnight fleet or an apartment complex. Let's call it 20 of these level 2 slow chargers, right? That's 800 amps of feeder breakers because they're 40 amps a piece. Well, maybe you're using a panel board, maybe 2 lighting panels, surge protective devices, some other things, right? Not terribly complex. Here's another example of like a sort of highway corridor travel, like perhaps an Electrify America, EVgo type of station along a highway. You have 8 pretty fast 175 kilowatt chargers. You've got 2 very fast 350 kilowatt chargers, 3,600 amps. That's going to be a switchboard, maybe a step down transformer, safety switches, surge protected device. Again, not rocket science. We're not building data centers to make these devices work, but there is a lot of electrical in the mix. And when you start to do the math and you start to think about the thousands of locations that are going to need this, it gets really interesting real quick. And then finally, pick your favorite delivery company of the year, the one delivering all your Christmas presents. And let's just pretend they have 150 trucks in a site. Well, there's a lot of amps, there's a lot of chargers, there's a lot of panel boards, switchboards, there's some switch gear involved. There's a lot of things that go into making charging work because it is a tremendous amount of power. Good news is that we can get to that power at off-site, off-peak times in many cases. And we'll talk more about that, I'm sure, Ed, going forward. Last thing for me, and I'll turn it back, is there's a lot of segments in the market that are currently speccing and looking at EV charging right now. These are the parts of the market that are going to potentially come to you asking about this stuff. So I just want to lay these out here, kind of pique your interest and maybe even open your eyes to a few segments maybe you haven't thought about. But let's start at the top here. You've got large delivery fleets, all the brands you know and love. Rental fleets, this is interesting. Lots of cars are going to electrify. Charge point operators, this is the Charge Point, Electrify America, EVgo, Tesla, etc. That are this new breed of fueling stations, right? Then you've got traditional gas stations, and these want to become charge point operators. They're going to be hybrid for decades, but you're going to see a lot of that already starting to electrify. Charging integrators, these are companies that basically are easy buttons for your customers that don't know anything about charging. Right? They're going to come in and say, we'll get it done for you, and these are specialists in the field. You can keep going. You think about large hotel operators. You think about large commercial property managers, both office and warehouse. And that's really important because warehouse with trucks are going to use a ton of electrical. They're going to need big electrical upgrades. Local fleets, huge opportunity. I will say probably the biggest one if you think about a local reach, any fleet, any truck from any sort of local fleet, that's the traditional white truck, HVAC, plumbers, roofers, contractors, eventually they're going to realize that it is much cheaper to operate electric vehicles than liquid fuel. And they're going to need, multiple buildings and people's houses to have chargers in them, so all their trucks and drivers will be able to charge. Multifamily dwellings, offices, retail, shopping, large parking decks, transit bus fleets, huge opportunity, school bus fleets, auto dealers, medium and heavy duty truck fleets. Those larger trucks are going to use the most electricity of anything. Seaports, airports, corporate employee transportation. Federal government is supplying a lot of funds, but they're also buying direct. They're also using and installing a lot of electrical. Utilities are investing in 4 different ways, and some of their programs, including their make-ready programs, are going to be sort of owned and operated between the contractor and the end user. So a lot of that stuff's going to flow through channel. So I just went through a ton of stuff very quickly, and Ed, I'll pass it back to you and be happy to answer more questions as they come up.
Thanks, Matthew. All right, so what I want to do is I have a bunch of questions, and Tom, we saw yours too. I want to talk about channel. I want to talk about the relative size of these different segments. But before we get into that, I want to bring Cassie in to talk about the funding opportunities. There's a lot of money flowing through the federal government. through state energy and transportation offices. And Cassie can give us a sense of how that flows, where it's going. And then we can come back to more questions for both of our speakers. So Cassie, I will advance your slides as you tell me. You're muted, so unmute and take it away.
Great. Thanks so much, Ed. If you want to bring up the slides, and I can just go ahead and get started. So we already did a little bit of an introduction, so I'll just kind of quickly breeze through the boilerplate. But we at NASIO, we are the member association for the governor designated energy offices, are governed by a board of directors from energy office is across the country. And we really have a three-pronged approach. We represent the energy office's interests on the Hill, as well as, of course, building relationships with federal agencies, primarily the U.S. Department of Energy. We also have a convening function, of course, lots of meetings and events, but then also have a research and an analytical arm. And so we facilitate conversations, provide peer exchange opportunities for our members, and also really dig into the weeds to try to provide them with some type of support as they're developing energy policies and programs. And so it's with all of those hats I'll be chatting about. And if you can go to the next slide, you'll see that, again, the purview of the energy offices is broad. They are responsible for setting and implementing medium and long-term energy policy in their states. Lots of deployment activities are funded through the energy offices. They also undertake stakeholder engagement and energy planning activities and really act as the glue between a lot of stakeholders in their states. And so you've likely already engaged with them, but if not, I encourage you to do so. Next slide. And I'm going to talk a little bit about, as Ed had mentioned, really some of the federal funding opportunities. And so NASIO supports the state energy offices as they invest in EV infrastructure. Back in the Recovery Act a decade ago or so, there was a significant chunk of dollars that went through the energy offices for really the first round of public EV infrastructure funding. And since then, there was the Volkswagen settlement, which some of you may have heard about or may have participated in. This resulted in a rather large sum, almost $3 billion, going to the states to invest in alternative fuel activities as well as EV infrastructure build out. And so the energy offices have been kind of deep into this space for a long time. And now with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act having been passed over a year ago now, the energy offices are working closely with their DOTs to really make sure that funding from the act is invested wisely in EV chargers. And so I provided kind of an overview of some of those funding opportunities here, just to kind of give a little bit of an idea. This National EV Infrastructure Formula Program, that's the shiny object right now. That was the first funding out of the gate in the transportation electrification space. That is $5 billion in formula funds that is going to go through the U.S. Department of Transportation to the state departments of transportation. And it is for investing in DC fast chargers along corridors in the United States. So that's interstates as well as highways. The states were all required to submit plans for where they plan to put these stations. Those were due to the federal government on August 1st. All states have sent in their plans, and all states have had their plans approved, which is fantastic. And so you can go online and kind of get an idea of where your state is heading in terms of EV corridor investment. And those plans will be updated every year. And so there will be opportunities for stakeholders to engage with their DOTs and others to help provide input on what might be appropriate for the next iteration of those plans. But this is just important because this is going to be the backbone of DC fast charging infrastructure along corridors in the United States. There's then another round. Go ahead.
Sorry. I forgot I was not muted. I was just agreeing with you.
That's okay. All right. Well, then there's another funding opportunity that will be released any day now, we hope, on charging and fueling infrastructure program. And this is a discretionary grant program, a competitive grant program that is also run through the U.S. Department of Transportation. It's $2.5 billion. And that half of that is going to be for charging as well as fueling infrastructure. And so propane fueling, natural gas fueling, et cetera, along corridors. And half of those dollars are reserved specifically for community charging. And so this is really the opportunity for communities, for other partners to work with their states or others to submit applications to get funding for chargers that can go in a community, at a workplace, at an apartment or condo complex, et cetera. And again, we're waiting for that funding opportunity to drop any day now. And so keep your eyes open. I also just wanted to mention that there's also, through the Infrastructure Act, a new office that was formed, the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation. As you all likely know, there's the U.S. Department of Energy, there's the U.S. Department of Transportation. This is a hybrid office with staff from both. They were provided $300 million through the Infrastructure Act to provide technical assistance. We at NASIO are working closely with the Joint Office as well as our counterparts. ASHTO, the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials, they are the Association for the State Departments of Transportation to help to provide streamlined technical assistance. And so that included the website there, which you can go and take a look at for the latest and greatest from the Federal Department of Energy and Transportation through the Joint Office. Next slide. There we go, perfect. I also just wanted to briefly touch on some of the other funding opportunities through the Infrastructure Act. This is not a comprehensive list, but it does give you an idea of the types of projects and the types of opportunities that are out there. One is that there's a lot of funding for buses as well as fleet vehicles through this and associated infrastructure. There's $5 billion for a clean school bus program. That is a rebate program through the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. This goes to schools, and the first round of funding for that was already released. Schools can apply for rebates through US EPA, so you can learn more on EPA's website. There's also $3.8 billion really for a fleet transition plan, and then grants for buses and for bus facilities. This is also through the U.S. Department of Transportation. And I also just wanted to highlight a smaller pot of money, grants for energy efficiency and renewable energy improvements in schools. This is $500 million. This is run through the U.S. Department of Energy. It can be used for all manner of upgrades in the energy efficiency and renewable energy world at schools. It could be solar panels. It could be improving air quality improvements within a school, et cetera. It can also be used for alternative fueling infrastructure and fleet purchases. And so it's a nice opportunity if, for example, a school is interested in doing a holistic upgrade of their facilities. Next slide.
Hey, Cassie, can I ask a quick question about that? About the grants to these schools. Does that grant money flow through state offices at all, or is that the school, an individual school district applying directly to the federal government for a grant?
Correct. Yep. So that goes directly to the schools. And so states are not involved in that other than if they're brought on as a partner, or they can sometimes provide some technical assistance for the schools. So for example, some states have administered deployment programs for EV buses in the past, for example. So it might be a good idea to chat with the state about that. But this goes directly to the schools.
So I'm going to want to keep my eyes open at local levels to try to find where those opportunities are happening and see if I can support in any way.
Definitely, yeah. And what we've heard from some of our friends is, of course, schools have a lot of competing priorities right now. They do not have the bandwidth when, they have a hard time with keeping teachers and buying their paper. They may not want to take the time to apply for a federal grant for a new bus. And so that's where it might be helpful to partner with an NGO, with an outside group, if they're interested in pursuing those funding opportunities.
So an NGO, for those of you, is a non-governmental organization, interest groups, not-for-profit type things, right? All right. Now I got your next slide here is on grid.
All right. And so a few things just wanted to highlight. There's a lot of money through the Infrastructure Act for grid upgrades. And I just highlighted really one big one here, but there's a bunch of others. But for the deployment of technologies to enhance grid flexibility, this is something where vehicle to grid technology, some of the demonstration deployment projects can be funded through this pot of money. It's going to be a competitive pot of money through the U.S. Department of Energy. So this is something for if you're thinking about working with a partner to invest in a deployment or a demonstration project for a vehicle to grid. This is a good place to look. There's also then some interesting provisions just on requiring the type of data that needs to be collected with electric vehicle chargers, etc. Next slide, please. And then also just wanted to mention that it's not all on road. There's also some funding available for ports and for ferries, about $250 million through a pot of money to reduce truck emissions at ports, as well as another $250 million for electric or low emitting varies. Obviously, this is probably most applicable to states on the coasts, but there's obviously a lot of transportation infrastructure that is at ports. They are drayage trucks, forklifts, etc. And so there's an opportunity through the Infrastructure Act to electrify those technologies as well. And then the Port Infrastructure Deployment Program. This is some of the fueling infrastructure that is at ports. There's an opportunity to really upgrade that and make it electric or a cleaner running fuel. Next slide. And then I just wanted to highlight a few things also on the research side, as well as the deployment side. The one that's highlighted at the bottom is probably the biggest. It's obviously important to our members for the state energy program. This is a really flexible pot of dollars. It does go to states via a formula. There was $500 million for it through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. It's also an annual appropriation for the states. But each state has the ability to really invest these dollars in any way that helps to advance the energy goals of their states, often goals set by governors or the legislature. So again, it's worth checking in with your energy office to kind of get an idea of what projects and activities the state will be funding in the coming year. Many states are choosing to prioritize SEP dollars in EV activities, certainly on the planning side as well. And there's also just a lot of expertise within the energy offices that you may want to tap into if you're thinking about engaging in some EV programs. I think that that's the end of my slide deck. Happy to answer questions, and thanks again for the invite.
A staggering amount of money out there. I think one of the biggest challenges is how do you connect with it? Who's the intermediary that connects that money with our distributors or their contractor customers? That's a huge question in my mind.
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's tough because almost all of the not all of the opportunities, but many of the opportunities have different target audiences, you know, and so in some cases it's the states that apply, in some cases it is companies who can apply, and others it's a community or a municipality. So you kind of have to read the fine print. I highlighted, you know, the ones that are going to the states, of course, and there will be opportunities to then apply for funding from the state government. But there are also opportunities to apply directly with the feds.
Yeah, I think the big opportunity for our distributors, Cassie, is someone has to install all that stuff. And that is our traditional customer. So at some point that money is going to hit our distribution partners. The question is, how do you get in line first, I guess, is the way I'm thinking about it. So I have a lot of things I got to think about after that. Thank you. That was very enlightening.
Thanks, Sully. I think, I don't know if a part of your, I mean, I worked for a distributor in another industry a million years ago. I know that we did not have, I'd never thought about having any kind of relationship with my local energy, my state energy office, my state Department of Transportation. One of the things I'd encourage you to think about to get to Sully's point is you have in every trading area that you work in, you have state representatives, state assemblymen, state senators that never hear from anybody except, you know, very often kind of crazy people. A lot of people don't even know that the state governments exist, or they know they have a governor. But one of the ways that you can, you know, kind of learn how to interface with these agencies is through your elected officials. They love it when business people are interested in talking to them, because again, a lot of times they only hear from people who have real axes to grind. But if you approach them proactively and constructively about, you know, saying, hey, I want to grow my business, I want to help grow our local infrastructure, I need some help trying to figure out and navigate how federal money is going to flow through our state government for electric vehicle infrastructure projects, they will help you. The website that Cassie gave us from the feds, and we'll send everybody the slides, but all those state energy, those state plans are public information. They are all posted online, and you know, they're not the most compelling reading, but make somebody in your office do it, and you know, and kind of start to develop a little expertise on this front. Cassie, also, and I'm kind of putting you on the spot here, but I believe the Inflation Recovery Act it did have provisions for residential electric service upgrades to accommodate residential charging. Am I correct about that?
Yes, I believe so. Yeah, there are a number of EV provisions in the Inflation Reduction Act as well, none specifically for the EV chargers. That was covered really under the Infrastructure Act. But there was extension of the credits for the vehicles themselves, and a number of other pieces, and a lot of also of opportunities again for the grid. And so I need to refresh my memory on the IRA. It's been a little while, but there are some opportunities there.
I will do the follow-up on that for everybody, and we'll include that because we are going to send follow-up to this to everybody. You'll get the slides, you'll get a link to the recording, and that'll be one of our to-dos, which my buddy Gail is collecting as we go along, all the stuff we have to follow up on. But there is funding for service upgrades, not only for home charging, but also there's a push for electrification in general, in home appliances as well. So there's funding everywhere. You'd think we weren't going broke in the United States. So we talked a little bit about what that engagement looks like. Very briefly, for those of us who are not experts, Cassie, we see these big numbers. The federal government doesn't throw all this money out at once. It's done by a formula. It is subject to an annual appropriations process. So is there a period over which these billions of dollars can be expected to hit local, to hit state energy offices and for local projects? And how does that look? Is it tend to be front loaded? Is it longer term stuff?
Great question. It depends on the program. And so, for example, for the National EV Infrastructure Formula Program, well, first of all of these programs are over 5 years that were funded through the Infrastructure Act. So we're a year in, so we've got about 4 years left. And so the funding, though, will come again in different tranches depending. And so states can apply for their NEVI funds and can expend them really as fast as they can. It doesn't have to be spread out every year. And so I expect that to be front loaded in a lot of states. One states also demonstrate that they have met the minimum requirements for investing in chargers along highways, which means every 50 miles along all interstates, as well as designated alternative fuel corridors, then they can use those dollars to invest in community chargers. And so that's something there. You might see a lot of investment along highways in the next year or two, and then it moves to the communities. The discretionary grant program may come out in a large tranche, but may also be divvied up across a couple of years. State energy program funds, for example, are going to come out all at once via a formula. So it depends, but you can expect for these funds from the Infrastructure Act anyway to be expended over the next 4 years.
Excellent. Matthew, let's get back to you. I want to ask you a couple clarifying questions. The channel for this stuff. You know, so Tom Gale asked a great question. Is there a where's the money? You know, where's the bulk of where are the big money projects? Where does that happen? And how does the channel look on these different kind of segments that you pointed out? Does this stuff go direct? Is it flowing through distribution? How does that is that determined yet? Is it market still making itself, or what's that look like?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting right now. I always tell people it's like there's a lot of noodles being thrown around the kitchen right at the moment. People are trying to figure out the right model to use, and so a lot of like national scale projects. You know, you get these companies and they have a shiny new EV team and they think they're going to go buy everything direct. I know one that tried that, and then 3 months later they changed their mind and went 180 and went back through a channel, because there's no way to do some of this stuff at scale without the channel. So I would say today a lot of people are interested in buying direct and they're trying to do this. However, since this is a futures conversation, let's all get real. In the future, this is going to have to go through the channel because of the absolute scale we're about to see. And so I think as folks sort of realize that you know, this is not as novel as it once was, and as our distributor partners and contractor friends get very quick at putting together these bills of material and understanding design, you know, it's not rocket science. We're not building data centers with this stuff, right? that whoever's quickest is going to win when the supply chain thing clears up, right? And so I would say over the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to see a lot of this start to really flow through the channel where it hasn't before. And as a follow-up to the previous question too, like a lot of the money that's coming out of the government is from multiple angles. It's catalyzing investment from others, right? So it's like a down payment on a house, but there's still the other 80%, and that's private money, right? And so you've got way more money than we've ever seen in this space flowing through the electrical market now. And so I would say get in and listen is my advice for distributors. Like create a team, create some specialists, put some resources on it, start listening if you haven't started already, start doing, and really whoever's the fastest at this is going to win. Whoever can really get to it, because then people will realize this is where the money's coming. It's coming from all the same places eventually back into the channel that it always has. It's just going to be more of it. So if you're ready with the knowledge of EV, then you're going to win.
I think what a great point is the federal money is not all the money. In fact, it's not even the majority of the dollars that are going to flow to this. So fascinating. Dave Gordon, I saw your question. Why don't you go ahead and give us your question live and in person with that mellifluous voice of yours.
Mellifluous, boy, that's a key word. That's an interesting
$6 word, brother.
Yeah, college. All right, and Matt, you might be able to answer a piece of this. Ed, probably look at the people who said that they're heavily into it, because they can probably share a little bit. But other than the chargers, what's the product mix that the electrical distributor really should consider? The key product categories. And then, even though we say that there's, let's say, $77 billion there, I'm throwing out the charger side. Any sense of what that means in electrical material spend? So taking out, contractor labor, contractor profit, engineering services, things that our membership doesn't sell. How much is left for the members, and any sense of what product categories and how that should break down? Because that's what the group's really interested in.
Yeah, I'll start here. You're going to like my answer. So the 24 billion this decade on gear and components, or sorry, 17 billion this decade on gear and components, and 24 on chargers. That's just hardware. That's not labor.
Okay.
So a lot of billions, right? There is, I would say, on the gear and components side, like all the normal stuff you'd need to think about a device called a charger. So, power panels, lighting panels, switchboards, breakers, surge protection devices, safety switches, all the stuff you put underground, and the charger itself, which again is the device. Level 2 chargers, very simple. Level 3 chargers, think about it like a PLC or a drive. It kind of needs those sort of technical resources, some expertise around project management, perhaps, with those devices. But this is the same stuff that's in our wheelhouse now for safe low voltage distribution. In many cases, you're going to see medium voltage distribution. But again, this is what's so amazing. I just called off $40 billion in the next 8 years in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
That's, again, conservative, and then there's another decade after that, it's even larger. So the numbers are there.
Yeah. David Burnett.
Ed, let me just throw in one other piece there.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Dave.
Because not only do we talk the EV infrastructure, but think of all these battery facilities that are being built and the EV factories. Every one of them starts with at least a 3, and then it's followed by the word billion.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't think I had an appreciation of the scope of this opportunity before I spoke with Matthew, and it's staggering. And David Burnett, you want to unmute and give us your question live? I thought it was a great question. Good follow up.
Yeah, I can't help but wonder where we stand with funding over a defined period of time and the available capacity to build and supply all this material. I mean, we don't see the supply chain recovering, and and some product groups for another 12 to 18 months minimum. So what happens if the funding runs out before the available material can be produced?
Well, okay, so I'll take a crack at that first of all. The funding will get the money will get spent. How quickly it gets spent is an open question. If you think back to 20, I think it was 2021, I think it was last year. We had Biden administration wanted to do a stimulus bill. A big part of the funding for that legislation was unused COVID relief funding. So they find a way to spend it. And so I think it's just, you know, it'll get spent, but the timing is can be flexible. But you know, if we have the capacity is a good question. Hopefully we build it. I think our manufacturers are probably doing everything they can to get us the material that we need.
Hey, Ed, this
Yeah,
is so I could speak as one manufacturer, and then Cassie, maybe you could shed a little more light on, you know, if these monies get handed out, can they be spent over more time than the 5 years? I think that's a good follow-up. But from a capacity standpoint, David, the NEMA figures, we typically have about 150 million in backlog of switchboards as NEMA, our Electrical Manufacturers Association, all the competitors in the US. It's now at 1.2 billion. It's 8 times its normal level. Why is that? Every time I turn on my phone, I think they throw a new blade in some server farm somewhere, right? That will not go down. The construction market's been fairly healthy. This EV infrastructure on top of that is just going to exacerbate the capacity, not necessarily the supply chain, but our physical ability to build this many switchboards and power panels. So I think it's a very valid question. All of us, I speak about all of my competitors as well, have announced or have already put in place, as we have, 150 or 200% more manufacturing capacity in these products, betting on the next decade or two of this electrification of everything, if you will. So we as manufacturers recognize this opportunity and are willing to put our money where our mouth is to be able to participate in that and support our distribution partners. So I think it's still going to be a challenge, at least for, I'd say, 2 or 3 years. And there may be a new normal back when a switchboard was 18 to 24 weeks. It may never be that again, but maybe a new normal in 2 to 3 years where it's a constant 35 to 40 that we can plan on, as opposed to what you're seeing now is 50, 60, 70 weeks. I don't know if that
thanks,
helps.
Sully. Of course it does. Cassie, you got anything to add to that?
No, I'll just add that our members and the folks we've been talking to in the state DOTs to share the concern about the supply chain, the capacity to meet the need and the requirements of when the funds need to be expended. So that's certainly a concern. One of the other just challenges that I'll throw out there is that the Buy America requirements in the Infrastructure Act legislation are very strict, much more strict than they have ever been previously. And so every single component, for example, that goes into a charger must be made in America. And that's going to be difficult. And there was an open request for comments from the Department of Transportation to get input on whether that was technically even doable. And we are waiting for really kind of the final guidance to be released on whether there will be, for example, a waiver or a phase-in allowed for the charging stations. But we don't know yet. So that's just another thing to keep in mind.
Thank you so much. Hey, Matthew, I got a question from Tom Gale here that I want you to kind of see if you can field, and then also make any closing comments you might have. We got 5 minutes at the top of the hour. Are the Tesla, other EV builders, and national service providers like ChargePoint, are those accounts locked up? And so the other segments profiled are the real hardware growth opportunities, particularly for independents, or is this the wild west? Or
it's not the Wild West. There are just a lot of different segments of opportunity. It's a great question. I would say there is a tremendous amount of opportunity for the localized area, what I call local projects, you know, the medium and heavy duty truck fleets, the local service truck fleets, the local parking decks, you know, all these things. These are not locked up. The national accounts are more likely to be something along that flavor, but the pie is so large that there's plenty of opportunity, and that kind of gets me to my final comment here, Ed, is there's a lot of questions about how do we do this, and there's a capacity question on everything, right? Switchboards, chargers, dollars, timing, grid capacity, minerals, like all this stuff. And I just want to say, like, the thing to know is that we've been here before. On the electrical grid, we figured this out with, you know, the electric clothes dryer, indoor air conditioning, data centers, and crypto. Like, we've kept up, and we have, like, EV charging is not new. Like, we've known about it for about a decade, right? So we've got a lot of smart people at utilities figuring this out. We've got a lot of angles in the market that know that if they do their job really well, whether that's minerals or electricity or electrical manufacturers like me, there's money to be made. So the market's going to work. Good news is that we're not doing it overnight. And so it's just a matter of getting everybody involved together to go at the pace that we go at, whatever that is. So super exciting time, and happy to keep talking about it.
I want to thank Cassie and Matthew for great insights today. As we close this thing out, we will do follow up on some of these things. I want to do a little more digging on the relative sizes of some of these segments. I will tell you guys that have asked about that, there's not a ton of good information out there, but I think maybe between some of our manufacturers, we might be able to put something together for you all in follow up. I will also send you a link to a podcast interview I did with a geopolitical strategist named Peter Zeihan. Zeihan has some questions about the availability of materials as well, grid capacity, that I think are interesting. We just don't have time to get into those today. But think about, we as an industry are at a point where there is going to be continued and protracted and probably historical investment in the stuff we sell. And what a great time to be here. So what can we do within our companies to expand the availability of our customers to put this stuff in, to make it easy for our manufacturers to do business with us, and to solve some of the logistical problems that we're all talking about today. It's exciting time. I thank you all for being here. A great conversation. We will follow up with some links with the slides and maybe try and answer a couple of the questions we didn't get to. But thanks again, everybody. Thanks, Matthew. Thanks, Cassie. And join us next month. We're doing something on artificial intelligence business use cases. I've got a business professor from University of North Carolina and a couple of private equity type guys who are investing in this space. So we got great experts next month talking about where AI is going. So join us then. You can see all this stuff at naed.org/futures. We really appreciate everything you all do for us, and we hope you have a great holiday season. Thanks for supporting us. Thanks for supporting NAD, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.